It was just a wedding photo. But if you look more closely at the bride's eyes, you will see something that changes everything. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had spent 15 long years working as a digital archivist at the Alabama Historical Society. Every day she sat in her quiet office, examining thousands of old photographs, carefully holding fragile pieces of the past in her gloved hands, dusting them gently, and cataloging the faces of both the living and the dead. She thought she had seen every kind of human story. These silent images could tell moments of joy, sorrow, pride, and struggle. Yet this particular photograph made her stop completely and lean forward in her chair. It was a wedding picture from 1910 that had been discovered inside a sealed trunk donated by an estate in Birmingham. The formal studio portrait showed a young black couple surrounded by their close family members, all dressed in their finest clothes for the important occasion. The groom stood tall and proud, in a well-fitted dark suit, his hand resting gently and protectively on his bride's shoulder. The bride sat gracefully in an ornate wooden chair, her beautiful white dress carefully arranged around her with delicate 8 folds, a small bouquet of flowers held tightly in her lap. At first glance, it looked like any other joyful wedding photograph from that era, captured in warm sepia tones and frozen forever in time under the bright lights of the studio. The family members standing around the couple wore the serious, composed expressions that were very common in early 20th century photographs. Cameras in those days required long exposure times, sometimes several seconds, so people had to remain perfectly still. This made relaxed smiles rare, and faces often appear solemn, stiff, and dignified. But something about the bride's face would not let Sarah look away no matter how hard she tried. While everyone else in the picture appeared calm and steady, her expression felt painfully different. Her mouth formed what should have been a gentle smile, but her eyes told a completely different and much darker story. There was clear tension in her jaw, a tightness around her eyes, and a look of deep worry, fear, and heartbreak instead of the pure happiness expected on a wedding day. Sarah had trained herself over many years to read the hidden emotions behind these old staged images. She leaned closer to him. Our large monitor adjusted her glasses and slowly increased the magnification on the high-resolution digital scan. The photograph had been taken at the Winston Studio, one of the few photography studios in Birmingham that served black families in 1910. The studio's elegant embossed mark and the handwritten date, May 14th, 1910, were clearly visible in the bottom corner. As Sarah zoomed in even further on the bride's face, something completely unexpected appeared in the pixels. In the tiny reflection captured within the bride's dark, glossy eyes, there was a scene from outside the studio that completely changed the meaning of the entire photograph. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. With slightly shaking hands, she carefully adjusted the contrast and sharpness settings again and again. The minuscule reflection, caught purely by chance on the curved surface of the woman's cornea, showed the view through the studio's large front windows toward the busy street outside. There, partially visible but unmistakable once noticed, was a prison wagon, the kind commonly used in Birmingham in 1910 to transport convicts to forced labor sites. Sarah could clearly make out the heavy iron bars on the sides of the wagon and the crowded shapes of several men pressed tightly together inside the cramped, dark space. Metal chains and shackles glinted in the sunlight, linking the prisoners to one another so they could barely move. Although the faces were too small and distorted by the reflection to identify clearly, their bowed heads and slumped shoulders clearly showed exhaustion, pain, and hopelessness. The image was small and imperfect, yet the details were devastating once Sarah saw them. From her years of careful study, Sarah knew a great deal about the convict leasing system. After slavery officially ended following the Civil War, Southern states created a new and equally cruel system to control and exploit black men. Police would often arrest them on minor or completely invented charges such as vagrancy, loitering, not carrying proper work papers, or even walking on the wrong side of the street. Then judges would quickly sentence them and lease them out to private companies for dangerous hard labor in coal mines, lumber camps, and turpentine farms. The conditions were frequently worse than slavery because these leased convicts were seen as cheap and easily replaceable. If one man died from exhaustion, accidents, beatings, or disease, authorities could simply arrest another to take his place. Birmingham, with its rapidly growing coal and steel industries, stood at the very heart of this brutal and highly profitable system that made millions for business owners. Looking at the photograph again with fresh and painful understanding, Sarah realized the bride had not simply been nervous on her wedding day. She had been watching, in real time, as that prison wagon rolled slowly past the studio windows. From the raw terror, sadness, and helplessness in her eyes, Sarah felt almost certain that someone very close to her, most likely a beloved brother or another family member, was locked inside that wagon. For the next 3 full days, Sarah could hardly focus on anything else. She barely slept or ate. She took the original photograph out of storage, examined every single inch of it under strong magnification, and carefully studied all the other items that had come with the trunk. The trunk had belonged to a woman named Clara Robinson, who had passed away peacefully at the age of 90 in 2018. Among the personal belongings were old family letters tied with string, a well-worn family Bible with handwritten names and important dates, and a small, fragile leather journal with brittle pages. Sarah gently photographed each page of the journal to preserve it forever, and then began to read the elegant but faded handwriting. The first entries were written in April 1910, about 1 month before the wedding. Clara wrote that her mother kept telling her she should feel happy and grateful. Thomas was described as a good, steady, kind, and responsible man who worked at the foundry, attended church every Sunday, did not drink, and treated her with respect. Yet Clara could not stop worrying about her older brother Samuel, who had suddenly been taken away from the street one day. From the family records carefully written in the Bible, Sarah learned that Samuel James had been born in 1888, and Clara Rose James in 1892, making her only 18 years old on her wedding day. Samuel had been arrested in late March 1910 on a charge of vagrancy, even though he had a steady job at a hardware store, saved money to buy land, and could prove his employment with pay stubs. Despite efforts by his boss, he was quickly sentenced to 30 days and sent to the dangerous Pratt mines. Through old letters written by a concerned white minister named Reverend William Colby, Sarah learned the horrifying details of daily life in those mines. Men were chained together at the ankles, forced to work 12 to 14 hours a day in thick, choking dust and total darkness, beaten with whips when they collapsed from exhaustion, and given very little food or medical care. Many died young, and their bodies were often buried in unmarked graves on mine property, without any notice to their families. Clara's journal entries written around the wedding day were especially heartbreaking to read. She described forcing herself to smile for the camera while her heart was breaking into pieces, knowing her brother had been taken away just 2 days earlier. Her family told her that life must continue. The wedding could not be postponed because relatives had already traveled from Montgomery, and showing sadness might bring more trouble. In the weeks after the wedding, she waited anxiously as Samuel's promised 30 days stretched into many more weeks. When he finally came home, he was shockingly thin, weak, coughing constantly with a rattling sound, and forever changed by the coal dust that had scarred his lungs. He died just 6 months later in January 1911 at the young age of 23, leaving the family devastated. Sarah felt the heavy emotional weight of this family's story deep in her own heart. She carefully shared the photograph, the journal entries, and all her detailed research with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Several months later, the Institute opened a powerful and moving exhibition titled Reflected Truth, One Photograph's Hidden Story. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a very large print of the wedding photograph, with a clearly magnified section showing the prison wagon reflected in Clara's eyes. Clara's actual journal pages were displayed safely nearby under protective glass, along with detailed historical explanations, maps of the prison wagon routes that deliberately passed through black neighborhoods as a warning, old documents, and information about how the convict leasing system worked and how much profit it created. Visitors moved slowly and quietly through the gallery, reading every word, whispering to each other, and often wiping away tears. A young black woman stood for a long time before the photograph and quietly told her companion that her own great-great-grandfather had suffered in the same system and was never the same afterward. An older white man from Birmingham stayed nearly 20 minutes staring at the image without moving, then softly admitted to his wife that he had never known this painful chapter of his city's history, despite growing up there. Clara's great-grandson, who worked as a high school history teacher in Atlanta, attended the opening night. With tears in his eyes, he shared that he wished he had heard these stories directly from his great-grandmother while she was still alive, so he could have hugged her and told her how much her strength mattered. Sarah stood quietly in the gallery watching the visitors for hours. She returned once more to the enlarged image of Clara James Harper. Across more than 114 years, the young bride's eyes still carried fear, sadness, and pain, but they also showed remarkable strength, dignity, quiet determination, love for her family, and the powerful will to keep living and hoping despite everything. The accidental reflection in her eyes had captured a terrible moment of suffering, but it had also preserved a powerful story of love, family resilience, quiet courage, and the refusal to be completely broken by injustice. That single photograph, hidden away for over a century in an old dusty trunk, now served as a powerful reminder that history is full of hidden truths waiting patiently to be discovered. Every old family picture may hold secrets if we take the time to look closely enough with patient and caring eyes. And sometimes, the smallest reflection in a bride's eyes can bring a long silenced voice back to life so that future generations can finally hear it, understand the pain, honor the strength, and remember it forever.